Good morning and welcome to today's 20-minute update, BCF's monthly series of interactive calls, Facebook live streams that give you a look into BCF, our initiatives, the issues we're thinking about here in the Baltimore City and County region. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Andrew Waldman. Usually I'm on the other side of that camera, but I'm happy to be in front today. With me is Brian O'Malley, Director of the Transportation Alliance. And on the phone is Seema Iyer, the director of the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. I just want to make a quick note that when we refer to the Neighborhood Indicators Alliance today, we're going to say BINYA. So when you hear the word BINYA, we're talking about Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. So good morning to both of you.
Good morning. Great to be here. Good morning.
Let me just take one quick moment and thank the BCF Civic Leadership Fund donors for their support. It's because of the Civic Leadership Fund that we're able to offer resources like the 20-minute update. So thank you for your support and for keeping these updates going. So today we're going to talk about disconnected communities. And the way that I got the idea for this call was I was reading through the Transportation Alliance's newest 2017 Transportation Report Card, which is a report card that grades 12 indicators of our region's transportation system, including indicators like access to jobs, congestion, physical activities, and of course, disconnected communities. The Transportation Alliance uses publicly available data on our region and similarly sized regions throughout the states to build the report card. They assign grades to each of their 12 areas and build a composite score. And this time around, Baltimore got a D. I got to say the report card is a little bit of a downer to read, but there's a lot of opportunities there for improvement. But I was really interested in this disconnected communities indicator. And Brian, I wonder if you could just take a moment and define what that is for the audience.
Yeah, so disconnected communities, as Andrew said, is one of our 12 indicators. We chose that one as you know, we set up the 12 indicators as what would tell us if we have great transportation or not. And let's set a high bar and then let's strive to meet it or exceed it. And we looked at things, I think congestion and physical activity, air pollution are some of the more obvious ones. The reason disconnected communities was something we felt it was critical to include was that we're in transportation because we care about cities and we care about neighborhoods and we care about people, not because we're necessarily transportation nuts or train aficionados, but we care about the health of cities. And disconnected communities tells us if our transportation system is helping our neighborhoods thrive. It's based on a census, a piece of data from the U.S. Census that tells us what percent of workers in a region spend 45 minutes or more getting to work on their commute. It's a one-way measure, just the way from home to work. It's informed by a recent study called Moving to Opportunity by economists based out of Harvard and some other universities, and also by the work of BINYA. So it's great that Seema's on the call as well.
So can you just tell us how Baltimore fared on that indicator?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is probably our worst grade of the 12. Like Andrew said, we compare with 16 other regions in the U.S. that have between 2 million and 4 million people. And on this one, we have 22% of our region's population spending 45 minutes or more commuting. And that's head and shoulders above the other regions in a bad way. We have a lot of people facing long commutes. And so for that one, we gave the grade of F because we were an outlier. The others tend to be clustered in the teens, and we're up there at 22%.
Wow, that's almost 1 in 4 people. Seema, I'm wondering if you could maybe describe a little bit more about your work in this area and just tell us why living in one of these communities that has such a long commute time, how that affects the community. What are the outcomes that come from that?
Right. So we collect all kinds of data at the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance around what people care about in their neighborhoods. What their crime rate is, how expensive their housing is, And we started to look at the relationship between being able to get into and out of a neighborhood with some ease. The neighborhood has some level of accessibility both to the residents that are there and to people that are trying to get into the neighborhood. And we've done some statistical analysis and kind of came to the same conclusions from a different vantage point than the economists from Harvard, that actually this 45-minute commute time was really draining some of our neighborhoods from kind of the workers that are actually living in these neighborhoods. So if you look at the variation, even though citywide the average of people traveling more than 45 minutes to get to work is just over 20%, we have such high variation. So for example, downtown, it's only 10% of people that travel more than 45 minutes to get to work, because there's a lot of people that live, work, and probably walk to work in downtown. But then our highest neighborhood is, unfortunately, Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park, where it's 35% of the people that live in Sandtown, Winchester that are working, traveling more than 45 minutes to get to work. And that level of variation between, as low as 10% in some of our neighborhoods to as much as 35% of our neighborhoods is exactly this idea that we have kind of a totally different experience of how neighborhoods function in the same city.
Wow. I just got a comment here from a listener that says, I spent over an hour and a half getting to work today, so I guess they're twice the average. They didn't indicate exactly how they were getting to work, but Brian, I wonder
what neighborhood they were traveling from.
Yeah, who knows? Brian, I wonder if you might just give us a little idea of how other regions compare to us in this area. How are they doing anything better, worse? What is going on?
Right. Well, one challenge we found is that other regions don't have the same ability that BINIA has to analyze at the neighborhood level. BINIA did the hard work to create these community statistical areas. So what we're looking at is a regional average using census data. And I'd say with regard to the comment, we all know people who face long commutes. I think. And we don't know what neighborhood that person's from, but the concern here is where you see an entire neighborhood where you have, as Seema mentioned, 35% of workers in Sandtown, Winchester spending that long of a commute from a very centrally located neighborhood. Something's going on there. And so what we've seen is that in this region, we've got jobs, family supporting jobs clustered around the exterior of the city in these job centers, like around BWI, like in Hunt Valley. And those are the best jobs for people who don't have a 4-year degree, but they're not as easy to get to. And our public transportation system isn't necessarily designed to efficiently connect people from city neighborhoods to those jobs.
What are the long-term, maybe this is a question for Seema, what are the long-term effects of a community that is disconnected from job opportunities? What does that look like?
Right. So the long-term impact is, you can imagine if in the region, I like to analogize all of our neighborhoods as being the muscles of the region. They're the ones that are doing the work. That's where we live. That's where we play. That's where kind of all of our activity happens. You can imagine that the transit and transportation system are like the arteries that bring, oxygen and blood into these neighborhoods and really keep them thriving. And so if you have disconnected communities, taking that analogy, that muscle is going to atrophy. You're going to slowly stop getting resources into these neighborhoods, and that's exactly what we're seeing in some of our high commute time neighborhoods, like Sandtown, Winchester, Midway, Cold Spring, Southern Park Heights, Old Town, Middle East. These are neighborhoods that have slowly started to see population loss over many decades, and so when you start to lose people, the long commute time only exacerbates that problem. If you have such a long commute, you're very likely, if you want to keep your job, to move out of the neighborhood. And so that neighborhood has actually lost an employed person. Or, unfortunately, the other case could occur that you're not able to keep your job because you can't reliably get to your job if you're taking so long to get to your job. And so the person remains unemployed in that neighborhood. And so it's a combination of, we found it to be the most critical indicator for population loss of a neighborhood, because the people that are employed in these high commute time neighborhoods are essentially, unfortunately, moving out of the neighborhood. And so high commute time neighborhoods are extremely correlated with high unemployment neighborhoods. So that kind of relationship that if you're traveling too far, you're losing population from your neighborhood, and you're unfortunately remaining people that have a harder time getting a job, and it creates a huge barrier. So it's a slow, really an atrophying of the places where people are trying to kind of build their lives. And we can literally see that in some of these neighborhoods that are otherwise, locationally extremely well positioned, but because they don't have any jobs in the neighborhood itself, because people are moving out, it becomes a vicious cycle of trying to get people to move back in, and transit not being able to service the people that are already there.
Wow. I just have a question here from an email. This is a little bit perhaps off topic, but they asked, how do disconnected communities affect schools? I don't know if either of you have a perspective on that.
I'll jump in, and Seema may have something, but we, in the Transportation Alliance, our work has addressed access to schools quite a bit. As many listeners are probably aware, Baltimore City operates on a choice schools model. So for middle school and high school, young people and their families are choosing the school that provides the best opportunity for them, that's the best fit. But for that to work and to be fair, we need kids in Baltimore to be able to get efficiently to the middle schools and high schools. And just like disconnected communities highlights that access to jobs doesn't always work efficiently for neighborhoods, access to those schools isn't even. And so some kids from some neighborhoods struggle to get to the middle school or high school of their choice. We've tried to address that. We piloted Rate Your Ride, which was a tool for young people to rate the quality of the ride on the MTA and to report their experience. We also commissioned an analysis of access to schools and how that would be affected by the MTA's Baltimore Link plan, which changed the bus routes. And in every case, we reported what we found to the MTA and are pushing for improvements to that service.
Just a note to the callers. We're not doing, as we normally do, 10 minutes of overview and then 10 minutes of questions. But if you have a question right now and you're on the call, you can press *6 to unmute yourself and ask the question. So if anyone has a question right now, please press *6 and ask it.
I wanted to just jump in on this issue of schools. When you have so many people traveling so far from the neighborhood to get to work, you lose the social capital that would happen naturally because people are able to be a part of their neighborhood. They might not be able to make it to the parent-teacher conference. Parent kind of involvement in the school becomes a problem because parents are traveling so far to get to work. So it's the absence of the workers from the neighborhood because they're traveling so far that becomes a real problem.
Mm-hmm. The Harvard study that I mentioned before, that was mainly looking at upward mobility, so the odds of escaping poverty if a child is born into poverty. And they found that neighborhoods that have low odds of escaping poverty are the factor that's most highly correlated with that is not test scores of the local school, it's not crime rate, it's the percent of workers who are facing long commutes. So I think that reinforces what Seema was just pointing out.
I want to not spend the whole time talking about just the issue, but what are the solutions? So, Brian, I wonder if you might be able to give us some details on what the Transportation Alliance is doing to address these issues in the report card.
Great. So I mentioned Rate Your Ride. When we did that, that was a direct feedback loop between riders and the MTA, and we were involved with that, reporting issues. But what we found was that the most frequently reported issue was a late bus not showing up, bus passing me by because it was overcrowded. And when we identified which routes had those problems, there was a limit on the MTA's ability to respond. And so within the MTA and outside, we were pushing for an overhaul to the routes. Let's redesign the routes to make them run better. But when they took that up in 2016, we urged the MTA to make sure that they address this disconnected communities issue, that the whatever the changes were, that they would improve access to jobs from the neighborhoods that have the highest percentage of people facing long commutes. And that was in our written comments and in our spoken comments to the MTA. We commissioned our own independent analysis of that and found mixed results. Some neighborhoods got better, some got worse. They did better on weekdays than weekends, but we know weekend work is a big part of life. And the MTA claims now, since it launched Baltimore Link in June, that things have gotten better. We're trying to raise funds to do our own study. Our budget for that is around $15,000, and if we can do that analysis, we'll have an independent look at whether that got better for those neighborhoods or not.
Great.
So we have a three-pronged strategy for neighborhoods that we're trying to advocate for reducing that travel time to work. So the one is, of course, we need better transit and mobility choices in general for people to come in and out of a neighborhood. Then we need to make sure that our workforce training, like I mentioned, the high commute time neighborhoods are also high unemployment neighborhoods. And so the natural tendency is to go in and try and do some workforce training in these neighborhoods. Well, we want all workforce training leaders to really focus on places that are actually on sectors of jobs that are actually close to the neighborhood itself, that also provide some career kind of advancement into the future. And not just think any job is okay. We actually need jobs that are proximate to the neighborhood itself, so that reduce that commute time. And then the third thing, which is a bigger kind of thing to tackle, is that we need to get jobs in these neighborhoods themselves and make sure that, they have an increasing population so that the jobs and the retail and everything else that comes with growth comes naturally, and so that there's opportunities in the neighborhood itself, which would obviously reduce the commute time.
We just got a question in on Facebook, which kind of relates to this very issue we're talking about. Given the state's reluctance to invest more in transit solutions in Baltimore, what are the steps Baltimore City can take today to advance neighborhood access to jobs, particularly for people without cars?
Great question. I'd say one thing is Baltimore City can measure outcomes and demand performance for its constituents. So even though the MTA is a state agency, Baltimore City can say for our constituents, we need frequent service, we need service that provides access to jobs, we need service that improves access to jobs, particularly for these disconnected communities. Another thing that the city can do is there are things that the city controls that can make the buses perform more reliably and more efficiently, like providing the priority bus lanes and enforcing them, like enforcing no parking at bus stops, like providing transit signal priority, which holds a green light a little bit longer if a bus is approaching. Those things can be installed, they can be measured, they can be evaluated, and what's working can then be replicated elsewhere. So there are a number of things the city can do.
Great.
But I also think, I just wanted to say that we must be a city that has excellent mobility, because without it, we will not be able to compete in the 21st century. We're the only Eastern Seaboard city that doesn't have a robust mobility kind of system, and we should, as a city, come together and really make sure that we are focused on advocating for that.
Brian, I just wanted to ask you one quick question about, you talked a little bit about evaluating the work of Baltimore Link up until this point. What's happening now with the Transportation Alliance and that? You're moving forward with a new evaluation? Tell me a little bit more.
Sure. So there's a national web-based tool called All Transit, and they can evaluate different aspects of transit service in all around in systems all around the country. And so we've contacted them about doing an analysis of Baltimore Link before and after. At the same time, we've also had volunteers go out and stand at bus stops and measure when buses are arriving. We're trying to get to the bottom of whether they're performing more reliably, whether they're running more frequently, et cetera. We're encouraging, we started a website called howstheride.org that talks about the 5 basics of good public transportation from the standpoint of riders. If we can do these 5 things right, then bus service will be better. That's speed, reliability, frequency, access, which we talked about mostly here, access to destinations, and walkability at the beginning and end of the trip. So how'stheride.org, how are we doing on those 5 things? The jury's still out on Baltimore Link. We're only 6 months into it. The MTA was supposed to report back to the General Assembly about the first 6 months. They've asked for an extension on that, but we're watching that. We have a 1-year anniversary coming up in June, so we'll be in front of the General Assembly. We've already testified in front of City Council, and we're trying to encourage our elected officials to watch this, to measure it, and to demand continuous improvement.
Great. We're just about out of time. I wanted to give both of you a chance to plug some things you're doing. Seema, what's happening with Bina right now that you'd like our audience to know about?
So every year we issue what's called the Vital Signs Report, which is a suite of indicators for all of our neighborhoods, for everybody to see how things are going in your neighborhood in terms of trends. And so the next one is coming out, the 16th edition, 16 years of doing this, coming out in March, and you can see if your neighborhood has also kind of changed the needle on this one particular indicator on the 45-minute commute time.
Great. I just want to plug one more time the transportation report card. You can find that at bit.ly/CMTA2017. You can download it there if you want to see all the indicators. Also, Brian mentioned the evaluation that CMTA is doing of Baltimore Link. If you'd like to make a gift to help them complete that study, you can go to bcf.org/CMTA to make a gift today. So we're coming right up on 9:20 here, and I want to just thank everyone for listening today and watching on Facebook. This is the first 20-minute update of 2018. We'll be back next month on February 20th for the next conversation. You can go to bcf.org/enews to sign up for invitations and reminders to our next 20-minute update. And thanks to everyone who's tuned in today. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.